Let me tell you about our amazing keynote, Dr. Micah Johnson. And we will bring him in. Thank you for coming in from North Carolina. All right. Dr. Micah Johnson is a sociologist trained in criminology and psychiatric epidemiology. He serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Mental Health, Law, and Policy at the University of South Florida. Dr. Johnson's research centers around childhood trauma, behavioral health, and juvenile justice. He has been awarded over $2 million in research grants by the National Institutes of Health. His research has been cited in the New York Times by Senator Bernie Sanders and others. Dr. Johnson recently authored a children's book entitled Never Had a Friend. It describes his experiences with living in homeless shelters as a child. He also recently co-authored the Little Book of Police Youth Dialogue, a Restorative Path Toward Justice, which is a leading resource for police dialogue. Dr. Johnson is also a pioneer of forensic sociology, serving in the state and federal court system as an expert witness, leveraging the science of trauma, disadvantage, and substance misuse to empower the justice system to make more informed decisions. Dr. Johnson's work can be discovered more by visiting restorative.policing.com, and you will be able to see his link for drmicahjohnson.com. Dr. Micah Johnson, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was looking for someone else to pop up when I listened to that introduction. Just thank you for that very warm and flattering introduction. I appreciate it. I'll jump right into it. Let me go ahead and share some images with you. Oh, please enable sharing, screen sharing, so I can go ahead and share some slides and some images with the people.
Just a second, we're making you a co-host again.
Okay. I mean, I can fill this space while we wait. I'm the king of that. But let's see. Stefan is the host now. Well, I'll fill this. I'll fill this space with just a little bit more about what ties my work in psychiatric epi to this actual work that we're doing. Essentially, what I'm charged with by the National Institutes of Health, it looks like sharing has been done, is to sort of research the etiology and treatment of substance misuse among justice-involved adolescents. These efforts in community outreach and community empowerment, all of these sort of efforts in transitional science or translational science put me on this path to being involved in peace-building efforts. Particularly between law enforcement and youth, being that is one of the primary areas that I'm interested in. One of the more critical populations that I think are understudied, underlooked, are the adolescents and children that end up in the criminal justice system. So when it comes to this relationship between police and youth, I have a unique perspective. As a young Black male growing up in the South, I was that kid who was bullied, harassed, threatened, and assaulted by police officers and felt powerless in my own community. I know firsthand why youth all over the world cry out for justice against misuse of authority, misuse of police misconduct, or misuse of power in general. We felt haunted by police in our community as teenagers. But I'm also that kid who, on one of the worst days of my childhood, sat in the rain with a totaled car, feeling hopeless, until I felt that warm embrace of a law enforcement officer. someone who saw an emergency situation, saw a human being in need, and came to the rescue. A caring human being, a hero. These personal experiences led me to this work, to be passionate about this work on youth, but also it informs my perspective and my lens, and it fuels sort of my optimism. Before I go any further, I do have to disclose that, as the introduction indicated, most of my work is funded by the National Institutes of Health. Particularly these federal awards, almost totaling $3 million now, are to investigate this intersection between trauma, social disadvantage, and adolescent health and behavior. And I just, these are not just disclosures, but also this particular science informs the perspectives presented in the talk today. In my 15 years involved in this work, which started as a sophomore at the University of Florida in Tallahassee, Florida State University in Tallahassee. My friends are going to go crazy. But Florida State University in Tallahassee. One of the most helpful perspectives that I've heard and that I've learned in this 15 years came from a basic intro to sociology course that I took as a freshman. C. Wright Mills describes this lens as an imagination. The sociological imagination, all the complexities of who we are, how we think, how we love are shaped by multidimensional factors. Each of us is shaped by biographical experiences, a family background, a position in society. We cannot understand ourselves and the world around us, our relationships to others, until we fully understand the biographical factors that influence us, our own stories, our own experiences, the historical factors that govern us. Before we take steps towards healing the physical body, physicians ask patients about their backgrounds, their family history, their living conditions, their habits. All of these things are needed to properly diagnose or come up with some sort of action steps to improve the physical body. If we are to mend the strained relationships between law enforcement and community members, particularly youth and folks of color, we must similarly take steps to understand the historical and contemporary context that set the foundation for these relationships. I want to begin with a warm and sincere thank you for your service and a congratulations particularly to my friend, Captain Shaw. I love seeing that. But to all law enforcement officers, veteran, active duty personnel, and first responders, run to the rescue with love and peace will follow. The profound words of River Phoenix. I will say something public today that I've never said. Maybe folks who know me personally know this, but I've never said it publicly. I've never disclosed this information, but for the first time, I'll make it known that for generations, my family have served this country in active duty and in law enforcement. My father is a veteran. My big brother and best friend is a law enforcement officer. In fact, the closest family and friends that I have in this world have all served in some capacity. If I took a snapshot of my friends at a meeting, you'll see FBI, Homeland Security, DEA, Border Patrol. My best friend in the world is a member of the Army Reserves who's coming home this weekend. The Navy, Coast Guard, Secret Service, and Air Force. That is not an exaggeration. That is literally my closest friend circle. This is Officer David Johnson. He was my hero before he put on the badge. He survived severe trauma. He survived an ACE score of 10. He managed to escape poverty, negative peer pressure, drugs, gang violence, and all the stressors that life throws at us to become a police officer, where his passion is connecting with youth who have similar lived experiences as him. My brother runs to the rescue with love, hoping that eventually peace will follow. He is not alone. He embodies the resilience, dedication, and professionalism, conveyed by law enforcement officers across the country. I've worked with law enforcement for nearly 15 years, and I've never disclosed my personal connection to the work that they do. I bet when folks hear me speak, they think I'm some ignorant lefty who does not care about the women and men who serve, or maybe I don't completely understand or aren't as connected to the women and men who serve. But on the contrary, there's a long history of service in my family, and the people I love the most wear the badge. But I speak truth to power, and I don't think these things are binary. Historical and contemporary injustices contribute to the strained relationship between certain groups and law enforcement. Make sure this chat isn't blowing up on me. Okay, there we go. Just wanted to check in. All right. Between certain groups and law enforcement entities, some communities have suffered hardships, brutalities, traumas at the hand of law enforcement and agents of the government or law enforcement affiliated entities. For example, historians have linked the origins of police patrols to slave patrols and lynch mobs. The average police officer may be oblivious to these truths, but these contexts set the foundation for the contemporary issues that we see. Historical traumas have intergenerational effects through diverse mechanisms, including traumas passed down and harmful practices passed down through traditions, cultures, practices that perpetuate injustices. Children learn fear and distrust of law enforcement institutions through textbooks, folklore, the media, personal interactions with police officers. Many activists, scholars, community members, and the leaders in law enforcement, many leaders in the law enforcement community, believe that these historical traumas must be addressed in order to achieve healing, mend these relationships, and strengthen communities. But these types of conversations are challenging and are further complicated by political polarization, fickle commitments to peace and justice, complex social issues, and superficial investments in justice and peace. Many folks lack the tools to have discussions that are triggering, challenging, and nuanced. We have this history, and many folks may not have an interest in addressing or even acknowledging it. But for many of us in this work, peace is intimately connected to justice, and justice requires truth and accountability. Many communities unfortunately, have toxic relationships with law enforcement, toxic, traumatic, and negative encounters with law enforcement, if any. The hard truth is that many communities have their own challenges, multidimensional challenges that make life difficult for community members and for law enforcement alike. Relationships are hard. Peace requires work. Relationships require work. We need to invest as members of one community. We need to invest in our relationships with patience, faith, and good intentions. Fortunately, restorative processes can be taught, and the skills needed to achieve healthy relationships, the skills needed to build peace and invest in sustainable peace and justice can be developed. And there is this phenomenal, inspiring paradigm shift occurring in institutions around the world, but particularly occurring in law enforcement. You probably hear a lot about community policing, but just so that we're all on one accord, community policing is a philosophy of full service policing that focuses on developing relationships with community members. The central goal of community policing is for police to build relationships with the community. One promising method of building relationships is one that was the topic of this talk, the process of dialogue, particularly dialogues between law enforcement officers and the communities that they serve. There's a specific need for dialogues between police officers and youth. The badge, law enforcement, it represented something very negative, something very violent. As a child, if the only time you see these people is when they come to take things, then you see them and you greet them as the takers, the conquerors. As a black male dealing with law enforcement, we feel this way. We knew that that badge meant something bad could happen to someone that we cared about.
So the conflict that exists between our African-American, black and brown community members and law enforcement is not new. It's been happening for the last several hundreds of years. And yet it's so highlighted right now through the media. These tensions can have life or death consequences. And so we felt that it was really important to bring young black and brown youth together with cops.
I look at it like it's just too much misjudging going on and judging a lot of books by their covers and not noticing what people really have came from. Have you feeling like, why am I even born to even go through this?
I've been that person stopped by the police, and I've been that person that felt, like justice was just not right, or my treatment versus that it was not right.
They tend to judge, like everybody judge. And when I felt misunderstood is when the police didn't really allow me to talk.
The citizens have to be retrained, and so does law enforcement. And saying retraining them is just changing our way of thinking. If once you've had more positive experience than negative, and you learn not to live off of the stereotypes, then we can make some real headway.
Things didn't begin to change for me until my freshman year of college. I got into a really nasty car accident. It was cold, it was raining, a police officer showed up. I'm sitting there and I'm crying, I'm in tears, and I'm just distraught. He showed me so much compassion, and he went above and beyond and stood there with me. He didn't have to sit in the rain with me with his arm over me. He just saw a human being, and it was just like this great angel. And we became brothers in that moment. For me and this having this negative encounter my entire life with the badge. And then this one occasion opened my eyes.
I think there may be only two groups in the United States that actually can understand each other. One, black young people. Two, the police. If to both sides, it seems that the world is misunderstanding them, it's a good time to say, you know what, let me open my heart up a little bit and listen to the pain of the law enforcement community. Listen to their fear. Listen to their sense of being labeled and wrong and misunderstood. Or let me listen to those African-American kids. They can't take off their badge, they can't take off their uniform, but they still feel like they've got a target on their back because of their skin color.
And so what better opportunity to bring those groups together to address these challenges and come up with positive solutions and building relationships. So what have you guys heard about this thing we're doing tonight?
Actually, we haven't heard nothing but dinner.
You haven't heard anything? No, you don't know anything yet. We are hoping to affect some change by building some relationship between police officers and community. To witness these dialogues is truly a miracle, because you can feel the tension and sense that dynamic that exists. So much resistance for both of these groups coming together. And within the first half an hour, we're introducing ourselves and playing a game and kind of unpacking these ideas that keep those groups separate. And to see the bonding and the laughter and the understanding and the forgiveness and the tolerance that emerges for both of these groups is something that is so inspiring to observe and to witness. It gives all of us a lot of hope for moving this conversation and these relationships forward.
I would redefine my role as a police officer and recognize that my job wasn't just to arrest people, but my job was to provide services and to be a social worker and to be a role model. And so I think when you redefine the role of law enforcement, you'll start to see a change within your community. You'll start to develop legitimacy, and you'll start to develop trust.
I was actually invited to go and participate in a youth dialogue, and it broke down barriers that I didn't realize still existed with me as a deputy sheriff. That session really opened my eyes, and it was something that I realized that the La Chicana Sheriff's Office needed to embrace.
As a youngster, my brother, now Officer David Johnson, who you met earlier, experienced police misconduct, racism, bullying, teasing, and other injustices because of where we lived. All the frustrations of being a young person trying to figure out life. He experienced those things. Today, he would struggle to communicate and identify with the teenager that he was. Teenage David and Officer Johnson are very different people with different skills, opinions, perspectives, cultures, priorities, and fears. There would need to be some steps taken, some support to help them get on one accord, to help them see eye to eye, even in the same person. Throughout history, communities have used the dialogue process to compromise, to resolve conflict, to communicate, to strengthen relationships. Police-youth dialogues exist in diverse places around the world. Diverse forms of dialogue are bridging gaps and divides between law enforcement and youth of all walks of life. These programs have common characteristics: restorative processes, principles of restorative justice, bonding, peace building, training activities, unpacking stereotypes and misconceptions and implicit biases, and most importantly, steps to humanize both the youth and the law enforcement members. My good friend Jeffrey Weisberg is director of the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building. We spent countless hours brainstorming, studying, analyzing, and compromising. We wanted to create an informative guide that spoke truth to power while also humanizing these folks and imbuing people who do this work and people who share these spaces and youth around the world, imbuing them with hope and our optimism. We hope that we created a guide that would be sort of embraced by both law enforcement and activists and youth, and these people that tend to be at the source of contention, or these groups that represent contention. What we achieved was a book that no one particularly likes, but it is a highly informative book that can be challenging for some to read, but it does present a peaceful and restorative path towards healing and strengthening communities. And that's what compromise looks like. Compromise is, maybe not everyone is happy, but it's a way that we can move forward together. These dialogues, and you'll see some great examples, but these dialogues pay great dividends in regard to community policing, community safety, officer safety, innovative policing. Also, there's dividends in regard to the financial burden of crime and protest, and also long-term public health. The phenomenal power of human connection is on full display in these dialogues. One youth bonded with his arresting officer. There's another anecdote of an officer confessing adversities and traumas for the first time that resonated with youth with similar experiences. Stereotypes begin to shatter. Relationships are forged. Skepticism becomes hope. Fear becomes trust. Of course, these dialogue programs require further development, test of effectiveness, fidelity assessments, and long-term implementation and investment. Of course, they are young and imperfect, but they have extraordinary potential. And we have seen phenomenal progress, not only in the work we've done, the work I've witnessed, but the countless forms of dialogue that I've studied around the world. I conclude with some solutions and recommendations. Again, we must remember the words of C. Wright Mills. We must understand the historical and contemporary issues in order to take those necessary steps to heal. It helps us know who we are. It helps us appreciate our neighbors. And it helps us to truly strengthen and bond as a community. We must humanize youth and law enforcement communities. We must invest in processes that support these relationships, such as dialogue and bonding programs. Police youth dialogues can be critical to addressing police safety, public safety, community empowerment, and social justice. Diverse coalitions provide the necessary expertise. Coalitions made up of community members, law enforcement members, activists, all of these folks are needed, need a seat at the table. That will achieve the credibility and buy-in needed for sustainable change. Systems of care are needed to address the complex challenges that communities face and law enforcement face as they try to navigate these communities to conduct their business. Law enforcement entities are critical members of communities and play a significant role in helping them heal from multidimensional social problems. For many youth, they are father figures, role models. They are leaders in the community. And community members are vital to the effectiveness of policing, to advocate for, protect, support, and invest in members of the law enforcement community. I'm going to conclude with a thank you and ask a question about principle to reflect on as you continue throughout this institute. How embedded are your principles in your work? The principles that you share, are they reflected in your work? Even the tough work we have to do. Are your principles reflected? Who are you? And is that unequivocally apparent in the way you conduct your business, the way you live your life? I was once inspired by an activist whose life was completely embedded and inundated with notions of equality and peace. These notions were reflected in that person's, the company they kept, the food they ate, their pantry, their medicine cabinet. It was reflected in the partners they chose, the lovers that they entertained. These principles were embedded in private conversations, public conversations, more than a tweet or a post. The work they chose to do, the way they paid their bills, this principle of equality and peace was reflected throughout their life. And it was unequivocal that you can take a snapshot at any point in their life and you would know what that person's principles were all about. And I'm really inspired by that. And it's a difficult and challenging thing to sort of think about, how can my principles be reflected in all things that I do? But I've been on the path, and I know it's a challenge, but it's also tremendously fulfilling. That if you take a snapshot or you read the transcript of our lives, everything we've done, the small things, the big things, the way we conduct our work, that our principles would be apparent and reflected in that, and that our principles will be a part of our legacy. I want to leave you with that thought of how embedded are your principles in your daily activities. And I thank you for listening, and I appreciate sharing this space with you. And I'll turn it back over to my dear sister, to May.
Thank you so much, Dr. Micah Johnson. Before you go, I do want to give at least one question, right? So Rachel Jensen asks, she says, many of the departments I work with are struggling to implement an effective dialogue or face-to-face events in the age of a pandemic. How can they sustain their efforts in a socially distant world or ensure their programs can be maintained long-term in the event of another situation like the pandemic?
This is a question for all of us. I mean, all of us are trying to answer this question in different ways. The short answer is creativity. Creativity and a little bit of compromise. It is not the same. I am certainly a face-to-face person. I like the warmth of human contact, but a little bit of patience, a little bit of compromise, and a whole lot of creativity. I am seeing folks become more effective. I am seeing people reach more people in this post-COVID age of Zoom and Teams and all these different platforms. So I would say creativity. Law enforcement is some of the most creative people. we can figure this out. Law enforcement is some of the most creative people in the world. And so if you present them with a challenge, that's when the ears pop up, and that's where people get excited and they try to tackle those challenges. I would say take note from programs that are thriving and see what works, see what doesn't work. There are ways you can make that human connection. There are ways that magic can still exist, even though it's in a digital platform. There are also ways that we could socially distance and implement these programs face-to-face in a traditional format in a way that's very safe, in a way that protects everyone, in a way that everyone could be comfortable with. I see a path both ways with some creativity and a little bit of compromise. So I would say be encouraged and know that I've seen some powerful things happen online, virtually, that could never be achieved in person, and vice versa. I've seen some things in person that could never be achieved online. And I've seen hybrid things that are exciting and could be a path towards the future. Ultimately, I think there are pros and cons, but again, I give you my optimism.
Thank you for that response. And we have another question before we transition to our panel. Jay Thompson said, what was the pushback to the book? I heard we created a book that a lot of people didn't like.
Well, that was a little bit of a joke for my co-author, Jeffrey, who I hope is listening. But it's not that big of a joke. Some jokes all jokes have truth. I think what we were challenged to do was we wanted a book that activists would nod, and we wanted a book that law enforcement would keep on the shelves. And we find that, there are some folks who it's really difficult to hear about some of these things. And it's understandable. Some folks, for example, the bit about slave patrols, that history is real. And for some people, learning that is like ripping a Band-Aid off, or it's shattering something that's very personal and sacred to them. Some people take law enforcement extremely sacred. It's a part of who I am. It's a family tradition. And when they learn that dark history, it's difficult to accept that. It won't become your favorite book. And that's what I was referring to. And we hope that folks think about it at least and figure out a way to move forward. And sort of, we hope that the truth could be transformative and help sort of demonstrate the need for reflection and the need for dialogue. And also humanizing. Once you know someone's path and how difficult it is, then maybe you'll understand the tensions of the moment, the fear, the frustration, the anger. And once we start humanizing each other, that's when the true magic of the human connection comes alive and starts happening. And honestly, on the other activists may think it's not active enough. Activists, some activists have a capital active, put the active in activists. Maybe we didn't go further enough, and maybe we weren't challenging enough. And this is the dilemma of the work when you're trying to bring people together. But we are extraordinarily happy with it. And we've had overwhelming positive responses, but we went into this knowing that some folks would be upset, but we hope that folks leave more informed. And at the end of the day, for me, it's all about inspiring people to connect with one another.
Thank you so much, Dr. Micah Johnson. I really appreciate the questions that are coming in, and we can't answer all of them now, but they will get answered. And they will also be posted on the website, restorativepolicing.com. We already dropped in Dr. Micah Johnson's website, so please look at that. And I just want to show you all his book, Never Had a Friend. And something I want to say really quick before we transition about this book is that it's applicable for adults, because we all have places and parts in us that are not healed, right? And it's that little girl or that little boy and those things that we were never able to have closure to. I promise you, if you pick this book up, you can read it for yourself, share it with the K through 12 community, your children, nephews, nieces. It's an amazing book, and it helps you to really unpack like biases that we have and judgments and perceptions we make about other people, and then just find that closure and that healing that you may not have received during your time in school. So thank you again so much, Dr. Micah Johnson.
Thank you so much.
And I will send you on the questions that are coming in that we can't get to.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.